Recording in progress.
Oh, okay, thank you. Call the meeting to order. Was the meeting properly noticed?
Yes, it was.
Roll call.
Marge Edwards,
Present.
Bob Lebowski.
Yep.
Gordon Carlson,
Yes.
Josh Kozlowski,
Yes.
Rick Peace,
Yes.
Becky Peace. Deb Johnson Shoe,
I'm here.
Sherry Harvey Beaversdorf,
Yep, I'm here.
and Dr. Richard Long.
Okay, thank you. Make a motion, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda.
So. Second.
First and second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye. June 13th. A second.
Is there any discussion on the minutes? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Public participation. There was none noted. Correspondence, Ruth? Any?
None.
Okay. Rick, are you on?
Yes, I'm here, Marge.
You're up.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. The office met with 29 clients, appointments, filed initial service connected VA compensation claims, reviewed, researched, filed claims. We had handled 200 phone calls and 210 electronic transactions, including emails and scanned documents. We had 6 outreach health and welfare checks. That included completing and signing documents for VA benefits. We also went out, I went out down to Madison and assisted in the Yellow Ribbon program. We met with about 200 soldiers to go over all the benefits through the VA. If they wanted to file any claims, we sent them to the right counties that they needed to go to and gave them information. We had probably had 3 members from Adams County that I got to talk to from that. We did a mental health community action team meeting, and that was working with various businesses and county departments to develop a plan to combat Adams County mental health issues. I'm not sure if Scott put on here this interdisciplinary team meeting. I'm not sure if that happened because I was on leave on vacation when he filled this out. So he's the one that usually attends those meetings. On the 22nd, the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs combating suicide training. I sent Scott down to that. It was a good program that he went to. I think we're about the only CVSOs that showed up to that. Then we're meeting with the Sauk County CVSO and the new mental health practitioner, Julie Powers. She went on her own. She used to be at the vet center, and now she is helping us streamline claims for mental health. So Sauk County had 4 good cases go through her, and I'm working with her on one of my harder cases for mental health. Other than that, that's what we did for the month of June. Any questions?
Are there any questions from the committee? Not seeing any, Rick.
Okay.
Thank you for your report.
You're welcome.
We're going to skip the Veteran Service Commission report because there's none for this month.
Right.
And then we'll move on to the report of the department. Kelly.
The first thing that we have is our May 2022 Health and Services financial report. Wendy's on. Wendy, do you have anything that you want to update?
No, I really don't have anything. We haven't had any large unanticipated costs, and we are pretty much right where we should be, between 35 and 40%.
Are there any questions related to our financial report?
I assume she's netted out for last year, so.
Yeah, Wendy, the question is, did you net out for last year? And can you give a quick reminder of where we ended?
We ended in the black, and I'm not sure what the final number was. If Kyle's on, do you know what the final number was with the auditor journal entries?
No, I don't have that available. I could run a report to find what that was. There were some small adjustments, I believe, for year end that we just posted at the end of June.
We were still receiving a small amount of revenue as late as last month.
Can we get an accurate number for next meeting?
Sure. Or Kyle, do you want to run a quick report and let us know where we're at?
Yeah, I could do that.
And then it looks like we do not need to approve the vouchers any longer. Okay. So can we move on to the C?
Yes, we move on to see that.
My narrative and the management narrative is in the packet. Were there any questions about what was highlighted in the narrative? There are no questions. Move on. The next item is review of the 2022 project status report. We did another round of surveys for our trauma-informed care practices. Those ended in June. We tried to focus on the program areas that provide in-home services. So we tried to get some surveys out while the case managers were in people's homes. So that was our fourth round of surveys. They continue to be quite positive. They are anonymous. We continue to track that, and we're looking at possibly changing some of our surveys moving forward. The family-centered treatment that continues to be supported by a grant from Children and Families, and additional funding has been provided. When the grant ends towards the end of the year, Coordinated Services is going to be working to coordinate being able to continue to provide that service through that program. The purchase of the 5 fleet vehicles, we continue to wait for vehicle availability and anticipate that the possibility that this may change. Our CCS service array, we are continuing to try to provide as much services internally as possible. We did hire that additional worker back in February. That's been helpful. It does, the more that we can provide internally, the better that is for our budget long term. And then as far as going paperless, we continue to work on going paperless. I know Wendy is realizing some additional efficiencies in fiscal, and they've reduced much of their printing costs when it comes to the billing end and some of that reconciliation process. And then, do I have one more goal? And then we continue to support telework where it is appropriate and where it makes sense. The managers continue to provide ongoing oversight. We continue to have scheduling in advance, and we continue to monitor outcomes and expectations for the staff. If there's ever a concern, we bring staff back. But we do see a great deal of success with those who are working remotely. And I knew someone was going to ask me today how many people are working telework. So I did a random number today, and I have 15 staff who are doing telework today. out of our entire firm. So I went through that pretty quick. Are there any questions?
15 or how many total, please?
I have to double check.
Just give me a round, okay? I
I would say that's probably less. Well, with their vacancies, I'd have to look at their vacancies. If we were fully staffed, that would be probably 25%.
Okay.
If we were fully staffed. But we're not. We're definitely struggling to fill vacancies right now.
Does anybody have any questions, Kelly?
Cars, any, yes?
No idea.
Is it gonna go on next year? Look like?
If I were to say it'll be next year, they'll show up tomorrow. So
Okay.
I don't have any idea. We continue to wait to hear from the orders as far as what they can order. What they can get.
Are they budgeted for this year?
Yes.
And anybody that's gone to any of these other committee meetings have anything to report? There's nothing new from Aging Advisory or the ADRC of Adams. We make more share comments.
We have the Coordinated Services Advisory Committee tomorrow, which Josh, you will be leading. And that will be tomorrow. And then I think this WHB, that's a couple months out, and Marsh County Alliance, I haven't seen the next one's going to be.
What time does that mean?
11. Here.
Okay, if there are no further questions. We will move on to item 9A, behavioral health coordinated services.
Sure. So I have Adam Short, who is our Coordinated Services Division Supervisor here, and Lauren Heitman, who is our Adult Protective Services Worker, here to provide a overview of the emergency mental health crisis system.
Kelly, do we need to be on the Zoom call for the participants on Zoom to hear us?
Are they able to hear them?
Okay, I'll just click on that quickly.
Everybody's on the camera and on the microphone.
Oh, so she's good to go.
Oh, I am good to go then. I don't have to hook up to Zoom.
You got 4 minutes left of your presentation.
Anything's timing of today.
So
As much time as you
as Kelly introduced, I'm Lauren Heitman. I'm the Adult Protective Service Worker for Adams County. I've been with Adams County for almost 11 years in October, and doing adult protective services for almost 6. And we're going to talk about chapters 51 and 54, 55. And I'll let Adam introduce himself.
I'm Adam Short, I'm the Coordinated Services Supervisor, and I oversee our crisis program here in the county. I've been here about 1.5 years. Before that, I spent 8 years at Alsace, and I've worked in a variety of psychiatric hospitals and practices. For our presentation today, we're talking about involuntary intervention. One of the first things I want to talk about is, as a society, we really value personal autonomy. As a culture and we value, we have that in our Constitution, our origins in Western culture. It sticks out. It's one of those things that really adds to and is a prominent part of our history. And that's enshrined in our law in the U.S. and the state of Wisconsin. So it's very difficult to take those rights away from people. We don't treat that process lightly. It's a very involved process to do emergency detention for people when that becomes the need. The law is structured so that, as it says, the least restrictive treatment alternative appropriate for the person's needs. So we always do least restrictive. A lot of times that can be working with someone. It's appropriate to remain them in the home or with family members or with friends in the community and use community supports versus placing them in the facility. And emergency detention should only be done if it is the least restrictive alternative appropriate for that person's needs. So we work with people to support them where they're at through our staff in-house here and also through Northwest Connections that we contract with to provide phone services part of that after hours care besides sending our staff out. Our next slide.
So this is a flow chart that Northwest Connections has crafted, and we thought it might be helpful to kind of see how the transition actually occurs. So when a participant or a consumer is going through the crisis process, Northwest Connections is engaged, and they have the immediate decision and responsibility. This is after hours, I should preface. This is an after hours situation. So Northwest Connections is the contracted provider, and they get the crisis call. They could get it from law enforcement, they could get it from the individual themselves, but they assess to see if there's an immediate safety risk or not. If there is, they call law enforcement immediately, because law enforcement has to be present in order to make sure that all of the situation is safe and handled. And then law enforcement may help with trying to get an assessment of what's actually happening at the scene, because Northwest Connections is not at the scene. They're the first person there. So if law enforcement gets there, it's kind of hard to follow that diagonal line. They may say, yep, we have a crisis situation. Northwest, we'd like you to do an assessment to see if an emergency detainment is necessary. They will try and engage with the consumer, the person going through the crisis, and also anyone else that is in an immediate situation, and try and get whatever they can for information. If they can't do an assessment, if the person doesn't want to talk to them, I've had that multiple times, they'll then engage a mobile on-call crisis worker to go out and do the assessment and talk with the individual. Now, these situations can kind of flow various ways. The mobile on-call crisis worker could be called out, and if they find that there is criteria that matches our state statutes, then they can say, yes, an emergency detainment is necessary. And then there's a transfer to the hospital, medical clearance is needed, and the hospital is sought. Now, sometimes an individual may come into the hospital and voluntarily look for services, which is a good thing. They're taking the power into their own hands and advocating for themselves. So that can happen where they go into a hospitalization, and then Northwest Connections follows up and gives us their report into our county portal. In any kind of communication that Northwest has with us, the reports are uploaded to our county portal so that we can follow up the next business day to engage and to see if that consumer is interested in services. Another one of the ways, I would have done this differently, by the way, but it's kind of wonky the way it's constructed. But another one of the potentials is that the person is there, they're home, they may have said something, but now they're taking that back. They don't have any weapons. And I'm just throwing out hypotheticals at this moment. But there's a family member, there's some natural supports that's willing to stay with that participant and help engage in services that next business day. So that's another one of those voluntary options, and we still get those Northwest Connections reports the following day, and we have staff that follows up with those participants to see if they're interested in services. Where it gets to the yellow on the right-hand side is where it says involuntary, and it's got a bunch of fun numbers. 5115 is the involuntary intervention, that's the emergency detainment. 5145 is an involuntary detox. So sometimes if a consumer is under the influence and they are unable to take care of themselves, now that threshold is pretty high because, as Adam said, the state and the legal system really embraces that autonomy. They have to be a high threshold for that involuntary detox, and law enforcement decides that. Northwest Connections may help with a placement, but that's initiated by law enforcement. And then 55, when outside, is a protected placement, which we'll discuss in a little bit on a future slide. So that's a very brief overview of that crisis system through Northwest Connections. Ruth, you want to go to the next slide?
So our next slide here talks about criteria for detainment and also criteria for having a hearing. So for detaining someone, the individual has to be mentally ill, drug dependent, or developmentally disabled. If you meet one of those criteria, they also have to evidence one of the standards of dangerousness as met in Wisconsin statutes, legal definition of what is dangerous. Individual is believed to be unwilling or unable to cooperate voluntarily on treatment. So if they're willing to go voluntarily, they go voluntarily. If they're saying, no, I don't want to do that, and we meet these criteria, that's when we move forward with the detention. So for a hearing, an individual, again, has to be either mentally ill, drug dependent, or developmentally disabled. They have to be the proper subject for treatment, and the individual is dangerous under one of the state statutory dangerousness standards. Slide. All right. So the results of an emergency detainment can play out several different ways, as we sort of saw in the flow chart. Settlement agreements, this can be either an inpatient basis or an outpatient basis. It can be up for 90 days. And if the patient is non-compliant, this can be revoked, and it goes back to when things were paused with probable cause in that 90 days. The other thing that can happen in an emergency detainment is things can be dismissed. The person was like, I was really drunk last night, for an example. I was saying I was going to kill myself, everyone else. They sober up at a facility, they're evaluated, and they just had a little bit too much to drink, and were saying some really inappropriate things as their self-editing went down. So it can be dismissed. The other thing is a commitment. This can be inpatient or outpatient. The ability to revoke this is given to us if the patient is non-compliant. It lasts 6 months. It can include medications or treatment order, and it can be extended for another 6 months on a continuing basis if we file a legal petition to do so. That's what our treatment providers feels necessary to best meet that person's needs. Next slide.
Okay, so the criteria for a protective placement, that was on that flow chart, that little 55 that I had mentioned. So with a protective placement, the following is the criteria: that the person has a primary need for residential care or custody. They're alleged incompetent due to a permanent incapacity of a degenerative brain disorder such as dementia, a developmental disability, chronic mental illness, which we characterize as severe and persistent mental illness, or other like incapacities such as a stroke or a traumatic brain injury. The disability is permanent or likely to be permanent, and as a result of the disability, the person is totally incapable of providing their own care and custody as to create a substantial risk of serious physical harm to self or others without immediate detention. So when I'm working on a case, the very first criteria that is not mentioned on this slide for a protective placement is a guardianship. That's why you'll see in a lot of information, it will be 54/55. In fact, our title page said 54 55, because we have to have a guardianship in order to do a protective placement. And following the line of personal autonomy, the state and our own judge has said that power of attorneys, other documents are able to be the lesser restrictive environment or lesser restrictive option. So if a person has a power of attorney, we're working with a doctor, and if they've said that they're willing to go into a skilled nursing facility or assisted living, we're working with the family. A lot of times when it gets to a situation like this, I try to really lean back on my case management skills and try to engage as many supports as possible. Sometimes that's difficult when families don't always have, are estranged or families can have interesting dynamics. So trying to bridge people to the table and coming up with an outcome that's best for the individual. But like I said, if you go to the next slide, a guardianship is needed for a protective placement. And where I get the most evidence for this procedure is from a doctor. We have what's called an examining physician's report. So that is one of the criteria that has to be met before I go into court to do a guardianship or protective placement. I have to have a doctor that says, yes, the dementia, they have to be 17 years and 9 months first off for an age requirement. But yes, the impairment, whichever one it may be, is so profound that they cannot make their own decisions. They don't have the capacity to make their own decisions anymore. The condition has to be permanent, and the individual is unable to effectively receive or evaluate information or to make or communicate decisions. That's a very high threshold that physicians have in the state. They take a guardianship very seriously because you're essentially taking away that person's rights. And so we have to take that very seriously. But yet still try to work with families and whoever those natural supports are, if that consumer will allow us to. I think that's going on to the next slide.
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
One of those, one was IE stroke.
Sure.
Okay, and it said it has to be a permanent condition, but a stroke doesn't necessarily make it permanent, correct?
Sure. So there can be times where someone has a stroke and they are incapacitated for a certain amount of time, but then through rehab, if they get to the point where a doctor feels that they've regained competency, then we can go in and terminate a guardianship and protective placement. Those are happy days for us in court to be able to get to that point, but unfortunately it's not very common. Another way to circumvent that would be if the hospital is telling us right now they can't make their decisions, but we're very hopeful and it's likely, then we might petition for temporary and extend it for 60 days, but more times than not, they're not able to, yeah, it's permanent. But very good question.
Yeah, got a question. What is the difference between a guardianship and power of attorney?
So this is my soapbox. I think everyone should have a power of attorney. And I tell, even when I'm out on adult protective services and investigations, I'm talking to people about power of attorneys, because a power of attorney is a lesser restrictive measure for a decision maker. That gives the power to the person, the consumer themselves, to say, this is who I would like to make decisions if I can't. I feel that anyone over the 18 should have a power of attorney, because you're taking the power of your own life and medical decisions and saying, this is who I want to make decisions for me. Guardianship is the most restrictive avenue for a decision maker. And then that's there's court oversight to that. If it was a power of attorney, it can be between those two people, and then two doctors have to activate it, or a doctor and nurse practitioner. With a guardianship, a physician or psychologist is saying this is absolutely necessary for this person's decision making.
So these guardianships are different than a guardianship that the upper chamber would.
No, actually, that's quite similar. In cases where there is such extreme family discord, or maybe I have substantiated abuse in an adult protective services case, or maybe just no one wants to step up to the role of guardian, the upper chamber is what we call a corporate guardian.
Right.
So they, if need be, I would petition them to fill that guardianship. And we're very lucky to have that in our community. Yes.
So I'd like to make it a little example here, might help a couple people. Hello?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, I had a twin brother that was Down syndrome, and he was definitely disabled, and my dad was elderly, and he gave up guardianship over it, and I took upon him, and I had to go to court to take guardianship of him. And then I was responsible for any decisions that were made with him. So just kind of to let you know that there's different levels of guardianship and yeah, I'm not sure if I made my message right, but.
Thank you. Joshua.
So yeah, I've got numerous examples of patients that have been in the care of health and human services, and they somehow fall through the cracks, if you will, and are released from the protective custody after 3 days, but have you a lot of times detained for 72 hours, 3 days, only to go out and be released and just commit absolute carnage, just days or a day later, all kinds of crime and things like that. So how can we make sure that they're not slipping through the cracks, and we identify these people that are falling through the cracks and end up in prison or jail? Because this is often seems to be the case with a lot of these patients that are extremely mentally ill, that cannot decipher right from wrong, that are not going in on their own and saying, hey, I need help. Because these people that don't think they need help, that are extremely mentally ill, aren't going in on their own. And they fit all the criteria for being committed. So why are they slipping through the cracks and going to jail?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what you mean, but do you have any ideas?
Well, I'd like to see these people be evaluated and medicated and in protective custody before it comes to, because I see that they're not getting evaluated properly is what my concern is, and that they're being released when they shouldn't be, and then this is at the expense of them, the county, the public safety workers and the public. They put people at the risk, including themselves, when they're not in custody as they should be, when they're meeting all these criteria.
I'm wondering if that's maybe an opportunity where we can talk about during the 72-hour hold, there is a process that's happening during that 72-hour hold at the hospital that specializes in caring for individuals with significant mental illness. And there is actually a process that's occurring at the hospital to determine really that risk and meeting that legal criteria. There's a whole process involved in. I don't want to speak like an expert, and Jeff, I know you're here as our corporation counsel who helps us as our legal attorney through these cases. But a lot of circumstances, individuals don't meet the criteria past the 72 hours. If they do, we're having a hearing and trying to figure out those next steps. I don't know how else to explain it. I don't know if Adam or Jeff has anything on that.
I would say too that there are sometimes during that 72-hour period where say the individual may have been off their medications for a while, then gets back on and they start thinking clearly, and then they're telling the doctor, yes, I will continue on my medications. So now I'm willing to voluntarily take advantage of what's out there in the community. Okay, now we don't have the legal requirements to hold them because they're going to do it voluntarily. Whether they follow through with it or not, it's another story. And so sometimes we have to let them go for that reason. But again, if they continually do this, well, then we got a reason to keep them back in to say, well, you can't trust their word. Just so many different things that can happen during that 72 hours. But basically from the perspective here is we're depending a lot upon the doctors, what they say. And if they say, no, they can be released, our hands are pretty much tied because we have no legal recourse to keep. We can't convince the judge he's got to stay in because the medical provider says, no, they can be released.
So in those circumstances, what we fall back on is really case management and engagement skills. And you've had a significant thing happen where you've been hospitalized. We want to make sure we're doing outreach. We want to make sure we're connecting those individuals to whether it's psychiatry or counseling, or maybe one of our wraparound programs. We're going to be doing as much outreach as possible to try to engage them in services. Of course, it's voluntary. And sometimes we're creating those track records of these voluntary service provision and various attempts that we're making, so that the next time there is an event, we have this track record of, no, they failed to follow through with the medications, they failed to follow through with this referral. We're building a case, we're building information so that we can go where we need to go. But it goes back to the very first slide of least restrictive. We are required to do least restrictive care. We may not always agree with it as individuals, but that's what the process is.
Do we have a county psychiatrist, licensed psychiatrist that evaluates these people when they're detained for 72 hours, or is there? Was it just the state that's evaluating them, or do we have a county?
The state will do the evaluation. We have a full-time advanced practice practitioner here on staff, and we also have she's contracted, and we also have our medical director as a psychiatrist. So we have those on staff, but when they're at the hospital or facility, we're relying on the experts at those facilities. And in some circumstances, you're also getting outside doctors doing a review when things are contested. That's really their role. That's not our role to be doing the hospital's charged to do. So when they come out, our job is to connect them with our psychiatry program. If they choose, they may not want to come here and they may want to do the recovery center, or maybe a provider they've seen for 20 years someplace else. But we do try to connect them to resources because we want that. It's a whole lot better for that consumer to connect them here locally to resources and serve them here than to have them being hospitalized. That is our goal, is to serve people here and provide those wraparound services so they can be successful here.
Do we have a facility here that can handle the people that we have to detain in the emergency detention, the personnel that can handle them, the qualified?
We do not have a facility here. We work with several different contracted providers, as close as Marshfield, Dane County, where else? The use of Clare, Menominee.
That is a pretty big a cost to transporting. I realize, and getting them to that facility where the treatment is.
Well, and unfortunately, I see this in the protective placement work, is we're going through a huge caregiver crisis. And even the facilities that we work with, for them to be at full staff, that's a major issue too. So it's a multi-layered issue.
Can we look at volunteers that come in and help with this? I'd be happy to volunteer myself on a basis any way.
I think one of the things that we could do a better job of is probably building peer supports and looking at people who want to help other people. sometimes that lived experience is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the psychiatrist. And I think that that's an area that we can really work to build, is our peer supports. Not always a lot of people want to be a peer support, but yeah, certainly if there's interest, we would like to build that program. I think
along those lines too, I'd like to see a way for the family to be able to be more engaged in this process, because I see a lot of roadblocks, and they're not able to engage as they should, because they have all the history and all the knowledge of that person. And it's not really being exchanged as it should.
That could be a challenge because, again, that value of personal autonomy, you know, maybe, you know, the family is trying to be helpful, maybe the family is trying to be vindictive of what's happened in the past. You don't know that. So until that person, you know, signs a release, you know, we can't bring them in. That's voluntary.
And I would say that that would fall back on good case management, because that maybe should be something that, in my case, I can't speak for everyone, but is to try and re-engage family even at a later point. That might be, my hands may be tied with HIPAA laws, but maybe that's something that I approach later and say, hey, have you thought about maybe now being the appropriate time to wrap in family? So you really have to, no one likes to hear this, but it's case by case, and it's relying on good case management and being involved with your consumers. So the system is not without hurdles, and sometimes it's just trying to take as best a creative approach at it and case management skills as we possibly can, because we want to see the best outcomes for our consumers. So,
yeah, looking at the next slide here, this is talking about our statistics for call-ins for crisis for the last year. We had 507 calls. Of those, 27% were minors, 71% were adults, and 2% were not able to get an engage on the call. Mobile was sent out. We have workers during the business day that respond. Mobile was sent out 37 times, so that's after hours between 4:30 and 12:30 at night. When we get most of our after hours calls. 83 calls were AODA related, so that's substance abuse. And then 6 of them were related to dementia contacts. So looking at our hospitalizations, only, you know, for voluntary hospitalizations, we had 4% of that, you know, 507 calls. So that's a real small number. We were able to do a lot of working with people to safety plan in the community, and the appropriate follow-up services with them to defer from hospitalization. 9% ended up in emergency detention where they're hospitalized. So we have a total of 13% of those calls that came in did end up in some form of hospitalization. Looking at this for adults versus children, for adult hospitalizations, 3% were voluntary and 6% were emergency detainment. Children, we had 1% voluntary, and 3% in emergency detainment. So we're able to do a lot of work with people in the community, contact our wraparound programs, our services with community partners to provide mental care for people in the community and in that moment with families, friends, community supports that people have to make it through that difficult moment.
So this is the statistics for 2021 for adult protective services for just the guardianship protective placement in Watts Review. So in 2021 is the darkest green bar there. So in 2021, we had four new guardianships. We did 11 protective placements. And so remember, I said you have to have a guardianship in order to have a protective placement. So 7 of those protective placements already had a guardian in place, and that does happen. And then based off the state statutes, I am required when a protective placement is done to follow that case and every year do what's called an annual review of the protective placement, and Watts review is the name for it. And so some of those cases are pretty stable and I'm doing my once-a-year visit, or there are some cases where I may have monthly contact on them. So for 2021, we had 30 of those Watts reviews. So that's at least a visit to the facility and a conversation with the guardian, seeing the participant, getting all of the medical records, and writing an opinion to the court on how I feel the protective placement is going. And that centered question, is this individual in the least restrictive environment? We touch base on that in every court hearing. So those are the statistics from 2021, and that concludes our PowerPoint. Are there any lingering questions?
I just have a couple comments. You answered a couple of my questions I had here. But how can we ensure those who evaluate mentally ill aren't biased in the interest of saving expenses, basically at the expense of the mentally ill public safety that are incurred by the county or state? Proper treatment of mentally ill patients is not serviced or provided by a licensed psychiatrist. So I feel that those that suffer from mental illness don't choose to have this illness and are people just like all of us. And we should all work together as one to ensure they live happy, successful lives as all of us hope to. That's really what I'm trying to accomplish. I'd like our community to be safe.
I would say one of the things we are incredibly fortunate that this committee has year after year approved funding for us to provide psychiatry here. To provide psychiatry here locally in our building, we're very fortunate to be able to offer as much psychiatry as we do. And that has been a great feat for this committee to be able to put together and put those resources in. I heard you say you want to make sure that when we're working with providers that they're biased. I think that's important, and I think that's something that we can continue to focus on and make sure that we are using providers that we feel confident in, and that if anytime we don't feel confident, we work with Jeff and as corporation counsel, he will help us navigate that process. We are incredibly lucky to have legal, an attorney that is willing to work with us, and when things are challenging, to help us find an avenue through it. But we will continue to be cognizant of perceived biases as we move forward.
Some questions for Northwest Services is a contracted services. When you put on that out for bid, is there more than one vendor that looks at that? Or?
It's very challenging. Every county kind of does their crisis, mobile crisis and crisis systems different. Some counties are large enough to have their own call center and their own staff to go out and manage all of it. There are several counties that contract with Northwest Connections to provide the call center. I believe we made the switch to the call center back in 2012, maybe 2010. And at that time, it was a really big thing for the state of Wisconsin to be moving this direction. Northwest Connections is way up north, but they are able to staff the call center, and they're able to do it for many counties, and they're able to do it. They do it to the best of their ability. I think they're starting to experience some staffing challenges also. It is something that we would certainly be open to possibly as well.
You said if they're biased or whatever. I just wonder how often that would help with that, or if, what you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, moving on.
Okay.
Thank you very much. for what you do.
Thank you. Okay, so the next thing is behavioral health update. Next one.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah, we're on a time constraint here.
Yes, I'll make it fast. So as you know, behavioral health team has been going through some transition phase over the past year. We've been using interim clinical services manager Tom Charles during this time, and he's let us know that he's officially going to retire for I think the third time the end of August. So we have certainly appreciated his flexibility and his insight and organizational skills over the past year. And with this upcoming transition, we have put out the clinical services manager position, and we're hoping to close the advertisement later this week. Depending on the size of the candidate pool, we're hoping and planning to interview candidates by the end of the month. We're really looking forward to having some permanence in that position. There are some very significant requirements for that position, including licensure and experience. So it is very hard to get people of that credentialing and that skill set to apply. It's just a challenging position. So with that, our crisis program has also gone under some significant restriction over the last 6 or 9 months. You saw a little overview of the crisis system. Previously, that program had been under the supervision of the clinical services manager. However, with that vacancy this past year, the program was temporarily transitioned under the supervision of our coordinated services manager and supervisor. Together, they worked with the 2 legal case managers to improve case tracking and follow-up. Crisis cases were scheduled for staffing up to 3 times a week or more if necessary. Several new systems were put in place to allow better oversight of case progressions and outcomes. Now the oversight of this program is going to transition back into behavioral health when we fill the manager position. And then we're hoping that the new processes that Adam has been a part of will allow for a smooth transition with the new manager. And with that, our 2 legal case manager roles are now going to absorb the adult protective services roles that Lauren just talked about. So currently the department has 2 legal case manager positions, which will both be vacant by the end of this month. And for our crisis program, and we have 1 case manager for adult protective services. So with the combination of responsibilities for the legal case managers between APS and crisis, we are going to fill 2 legal case manager roles. And then we're going to hold that 3rd position to evaluate the current process with absorbing the APS roles within crisis. If things are successful, we may be able to eliminate a position. If the caseload is really significant, we will fill the 3rd position. Another exciting transition that we have is that our interns are getting closer to completing practicums and internships. One of our students is going to complete her therapist requirements by mid-August, and we're hoping to be able to look at her transition. And then the other one is going to finish her requirements by the end of the year. And then our last update is that on July 16, anyone in the United States can call or text 988 and use the chat function on www.suicidepreventionlifeline.org. This is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The name of the service is going to change to 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. 988 is similar to 911 in the fact that they will accept calls, texts. They'll also accept chats from anyone who needs support for suicide, who's feeling suicidal, may have a mental health crisis, or substance use issue. People can contact 988 if they are concerned about a loved one in crisis also. The counselors at the Wisconsin Lifeline program are trained to listen and support callers during their distress. They'll focus on de-escalation and coping skills. And if it's a true crisis, they will refer them back to our crisis system. So this is really kind of a warm line. It is not intended to replace our crisis system. It is to augment our crisis system. We'll be doing more advertising once it actually goes into effect. The Cody is going to push out a press release and some Facebook posts, but we're really waiting until the transition date of July 16th. Yes, sure.
Now, this new case manager position is one of the criteria. Do they have to be a licensed psychiatrist? Are they able to identify extreme mental conditions such as schizophrenia, bipolar? Are they educated in this kind of a background?
Our crisis workers are bachelor level or master level. We are only able to contract with, well, contracting with the psychiatrist is incredibly costly. So we do have a psychiatrist on our psychiatrist contracted, as well as our nurse practitioner, as well as supervisors who are well trained. I'm sure Adam, you can talk about the licensure that you have to complete and what you need to know to become master's prepared with that. They also have to go through a significant amount of crisis training. They have to learn multiple different things. They need to be skilled in to provide excellent case management and crisis skills, including de-escalation.
Well, they have experience.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
You know, part of it is hiring staff is incredibly challenging. You know, we have several vacancies right now where we're not getting any staff. We're not getting any applicants. So then our job is to train and build skills and competencies. Adam, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No.
So if you know staff, send them our way.
Oh, I definitely will. I believe me.
Is it because of lack of individuals or pay?
I think right now it is an employee market. So there are so many vacancies that pretty much you can come in with limited experience and negotiate a higher rate than what staff are currently making. We don't have a lot of people in the community who want to stay in the community, you know, that are young professionals. You're either well connected here and you want to stay here, or we get young staff who come.
And you train them and they go out.
Yeah. You know, we just lost a social worker who been with us for I believe 5 years. Very skilled, excellent, wonderful, can't find a flaw with the individual. Can go work the facility 2 blocks down, 2 miles from his house, makes more money, doing the same job.
Who's that?
Can't go into specifics about the staff
here,
but yeah. So, but it's unfortunate, and it's an employee market right now. Hopefully, at some point it'll change. Hopefully, things ebb and flow, but that's where we're at.
Okay, budget hearing date.
So we need to have a budget hearing for the Health and Human Services budget. We need to do that every year. We need to run that in the paper for 3 weeks. Wendy is anticipating having a rough outline of the budget by the first full week of August. So I'm wondering if we could do the budget hearing towards the end of the month, like the 22nd or 23rd or 29th or 30th. Those are Mondays and Tuesdays, or if we want to wait until September 6th. And generally, we've ran the public hearing. I think we've done it as early as 3, and then ran the general health and human services meeting to immediately follow.
You don't have a statute that says you have to do a certain thing?
No, just that we have to. I know Kyle and Cynthia are on. I think our meeting with them might be before that. We have a large. We have, or we could. I think in the past we've skipped our September meeting when the August meeting. Or we did 2 meetings in August.
Yeah, our meetings are really this.
So if we wanted to postpone our August meeting till the end of the month and then not have a September meeting.
How's that work for you?
So we have all of our presentations for.
It's open now.
So you want to do the 29th, 30th, Monday the 29th?
Monday the 29th.
Actually, that probably won't work for me because that's the annual school board meeting. The 4th Monday of August Maybe I'm
I
sorry,
said 22nd.
That might be the
22nd.
22nd, but I
Yeah,
think
it's
it's like
the fifth
seven,
one.
is it
It'll
right?
be the fifth one.
it might be the 5th, but
Is that a seven? School board meeting?
tonight, yeah.
No, I mean, the one on the fourth, Monday. or something.
You want to do it on Tuesday then, just to be.
I would rather be on Tuesday.
The 30th.
Josh,
Yeah,
okay, August 30th.
So is 3 o'clock okay, or is 4 o'clock better?
4 o'clock. That's
4 o'clock,
fine.
and then we'll run our committee meeting,
Right,
right, I think in the past we waited 15 minutes and then started the meeting. So for that, so then we will not have a meeting on the 8th, and then we can decide when we want to meet, if we're going to skip September and go back to the October meeting calendar. Okay. How does that sound?
everybody else, agreement, okay? Okay, next on the agenda is the tour, excuse me, of practical sense, but I think we'll adjourn prior to going over there. If there is nothing else to come before the committee.
Are we discussing next committee agendas?
I think you can just
Like,
text her something or,
let Kelly know.
yeah, or you want to.
Okay. Yeah. Remember though, how soon you have to be there. Because there is a deadline before it has to be carried.
We're gonna do the budget.
And we're doing budget. Yeah.
We can talk.
Okay.
Okay, those of you that would like to go to practical sense,
Let me know.
okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who wants